The next thing we're going to do is create a new local repository. To do that, we want to use the +create button at the top of the screen. For now, we are going to create this repository locally, so leave the Push to GitHub button unchecked. Let's go ahead and make a repository named Only Local Repo. I'm going to leave the description blank here. Please notice that the location of my repository is the default one. I just set it up. You can click the ellipses to change from that default. However, I think this location will be fine for us. Now let's create this repository. Now that we've created this local repository, you'll see that it's tracked under our local repositories screen. You'll see it listed here right after our one repository to find that we added earlier. Now we're going to see how we can connect repositories to GitHub. This repository we've set up will allow us to work locally. We can make changes, and in fact we can commit these changes that are already here. You'll notice that our git attributes and git ignore files were created for us already. In order to commit these, we just need to type in a commit message. And then we go ahead and click this checkbox, which will commit our changes to master. In this case, master is the branch that we're working with. Now our changes are committed. If we want to push these changes to GitHub, we can go ahead and click on this Push to GitHub link. Since we haven't connected this to GitHub before, we're prompted with the opportunity to connect to GitHub. Since we're going to be using a public repository, we don't want to check the Keep This Code Private checkbox. We do, however, need to make sure that our account is selected and is the account that we want this repository associated with. And since that's the correct one, I'm going to go ahead and click this Push button. And now, my repository is connected to GitHub. Now that we've connected our repository to GitHub, we can go and take a look at all of our changes there. Now keep in mind that we only have one commit we've sent up there so far. But to check it out, all we have to do is click on this with the right mouse button and choose View on GitHub, and that will open up our web browser. Now that we're on the website, you can see that we have our initial commit with a couple of files. Happened a few minutes ago, and we're able to work with this in GitHub. The next thing that we want to do with our GitHub account is to create a new repository. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and click on the Create a New Repository button. We've done this before. All we're going to do is create one of these so we can look at how cloning works. So now that we've created this new repository, we're going to go ahead and use a little shortcut that GitHub for Windows gives us. You'll notice this Clone in Desktop button down here. And you'll notice that that icon is the same icon used for local repositories in GitHub for Windows. If we click this button, watch what happens. You'll notice that GitHub for Windows has brought us to the local repository screen for this repository. It has also automatically pulled that repository down. So we're now able to work with this one locally. And that's a great shortcut for getting your repositories set up. And that Clone in Desktop button will work with any repository that you find on GitHub. If you were paying attention earlier, there were two projects that I did not include when I was scanning for existing projects when changing the options in GitHub for Windows. Those two projects are shown right here in this Explorer window. Now the reason that we're looking at this is because we're going to be copying these into our GitHub for Windows, and it's going to start tracking these repositories. You'll notice that each one of these is a Git repository. Let's go ahead and drag one of these in. You'll notice now that that repository is being tracked by GitHub for Windows. The next cool way that we'll be getting our repository into GitHub is by using the browser window itself. Let's create another repository on github.com. Now that this repository exists, we're going to need to drag its URL into GitHub for Windows. Let's go ahead and shrink down that window and drag the URL over. You'll notice that it pulled in my repository again. So now GitHub for Windows is tracking this repository as well. Another cool way to create a local repository is to set up a folder in Explorer. Notice here that I didn't include any spaces. That's because it's important that this name match with a valid repository name in GitHub, and we can't have spaces for those. So now, even though this is not a GitHub repository, I can take this folder, drag it into GitHub, and upon doing so, it prompts me to create a new repository in this location. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And now if we switch back to that window, you'll see that all the required Git files and folders have been created for us. This repository is also now being tracked. Now I'm going to show one more way that we can add in another repository to GitHub for Windows. Let's go ahead and click on the GitHub section and click on My Account. When I do this, I see a number of different repositories. These repositories are all ones that I've been creating, and they're just sample repositories. Let's go ahead and bring one of these down. If I click on this repository, it brings up the README file over here to tell me a little bit about it. However, the README file on this was pretty much blank. It only had the title. In order for this to be used locally, I need to clone it. Once I've done that, I now have a local copy. So if I click on this, it will open up the repository, and I can see all the commits that are in here. Now if I go back to local and go to repositories, you'll see that it's here as well, along with all of my other local repositories.